Podjay production.
The following podcast deals with sexual exploitation and violence against children. Listener discretion is advised. This is also an ongoing investigation. So if you have information, please contact Crime Stoppers on 1-800-333-000 or get in touch with me at adamshandwriter@gmail.com. Welcome to episode 4 of Creating Mr. Cruel. I'm your host, Adam Shand. In 1992, in the wake of Karmein Chan's murder, police reviewed what became known as the canon cases of this investigation. 4 abductions, including Chan, that senior police believed were committed by one individual.
Nicky's abductor, going on voice, is believed to be aged between 20 and 40 when he broke into the Lynas family home in Monmouth Avenue, Canterbury, just before 11 o'clock last Tuesday night. Nicky said he was wearing a fairly distinctive balaclava, possibly home knitted. It's described as dark green with cream stitching around the eyes and mouth. The man carried a handgun and a 35cm long kitchen knife with a black plastic handle and serrated blade.
The next of these attacks occurred on July 3, 1990. The victim was a 13-year-old schoolgirl, Nicola Lynas, who was taken from her family home in Canterbury, a well-to-do suburb in Melbourne's east.
Nicky was blindfolded, then abducted in her father's blue Holden Berliner, which was abandoned in nearby Chaucer Crescent about 5 to 10 minutes later.
It was the last night the Lynas family were to spend in the rented premises on Monmouth Avenue, Canterbury. Brian Lynas, a partner with accounting firm PricewaterhouseCoopers, had come from England with his family 3 years earlier, and it was time to return home. After a few days in an apartment in the city, the family was packing up the house in Monmouth Avenue. The previous week had been busy for Brian and his wife Rosemary, as they bid farewell to friends and associates. On July 3, 1990, they went out for dinner with friends, leaving their children, Fiona, 15, and Nicole, 13, at home. The girls ordered a pizza, which arrived at 8:05 p.m, and they settled in to eat and watch television. Towards 11 p.m, they were ready for bed. Nicole dragged her mattress into Fiona's room for their last night together in the house. As they drifted off to sleep, the intruder was working his way in via a window in the main bedroom. It was a wind-out style, and the offender tried to weaken the screws, fastening the winder arm to the frame, using either a hand or battery-operated drill. Then he tried to remove the beading from the frame to remove the glass, but only succeeded in breaking one corner. He then reached through the broken section and unwound the window fully open. Then he snapped off the window arm and he was inside. Nicole, known as Nicky, was awoken by someone tapping on her head with a long serrated kitchen knife. He was also carrying a handgun. Fiona Lynas was woken in a similar manner. Once again, the man claimed to be after money and led the kids to the main bedroom where he went through their father's wallet, leaving $4,000 worth of traveller's checks. The man then hogtied Fiona face down on the bed using galvanised wire, like wire from a clothesline. He then took Nicky to the kitchen where he rifled through her mum's purse. He cut the telephone cord and took the keys to the family car off a hook. He then led Nicky to her bedroom where he searched the cupboards. He made Nicky get dressed and packed items of clothes in a Ken Doan bag. He then took Nicky back to the main bedroom where Fiona was and began asking them about their father's employment. He told Fiona that he planned to kidnap Nicky and asked for a ransom of $25,000 the following day, but a demand was never made. He put Nicky in her parents' car and made her kneel down under the dashboard on the passenger side. He only drove a short distance. He stopped and put thick adhesive tape over Nicky's eyes and covered her head with a balaclava. He then drove to a location about 500 metres from Nicky's home, Chaucer Avenue, Canterbury, where he'd parked a vehicle. Nikki was bundled under the dashboard of that vehicle and the journey resumed, this time for about 30 minutes. The car was tuned to a local radio station, KZFM, the matchmaker program. As they drove, the man spoke to Nikki. "Do you think you're worth $25,000? Do you think your dad will be able to get the money?" The ransom idea was important to his plan. It disguised his true motive and kept Nikki calm. "You'll be all right. Before you know it, you'll be home very soon." They arrived at a dwelling, possibly within a block of units, where Nikki would be held captive for the next 50 hours. He said she would be home by about Thursday. It would take 2 or 3 days to get the money and arrange the pickup. Nikki was taken to a bedroom where the radio was already tuned to the matchmaker program, also like the vehicle. He then washed her thoroughly in a bath and told her he was going to have sex with her. There would be medical examinations after he released her, and so he didn't want to leave any forensic evidence. Later, the man leashed Nikki by means of a kind of harness around her neck. A similar device with a padlock was used in the Sharon Wills abduction. He then went to sleep alongside Nikki. She didn't sleep that night, and sometime early after dawn, she could hear the sound of jet planes landing or taking off. In the morning, the man turned the radio on, and she used it to calculate the time. In the afternoon, the man told Nikki his friend was coming to visit. The friend would watch her while he went to call her father about the ransom, but there was no call ever made. At about 3 p.m, the so-called friend entered the room and turned up the volume of the radio. There was no interaction or conversation between them, and Nikki suspected the offender had made up the friend. A few minutes later, the offender returned, and Nikki told him what his friend had done. The man laughed and replied, "Oh, he's a worrywart, my friend, that's all." He had the Herald newspaper and began reading to her, kneeling by the bed. Late last night, a 13-year-old schoolgirl was abducted from her home, and her sister had been left tied up. The offender wanted $25,000 ransom money. The story carried details of other kidnappings. He wasn't concerned. It was just the media trying to link him to the one in the late 70s, he said, and another one 18 months ago. He hadn't even been in Victoria then, he protested. The newspaper reported he was supposed to be in his mid-30s. He thought he looked much younger, he told Nikki, smoothing her hair in a bizarre caress. On day 2, this time making her dress up in her school uniform, he confessed he'd followed Nikki home from school. He had fantasies about making love with a schoolgirl, but never thought it would happen. Nikki asked that if he was going to kill her, could he please let her parents have her body? He laughed. No, just remember that I'm not going to kill you, he said, tapping her on the nose, almost affectionately. The next day, he had the newspaper again. Nikki's kidnap was front page, he said. They were still linking him to other abductions. He seemed interested in how police would question Nikki. "When you get back, the police will ask you questions. It's up to you how much you tell them. But if they find me and they get me, then I will find you and get you. And I will have a long time to think about what I'm going to do to you, and I will never forget. And even if I can't do it, I've got friends, and I can even get you in England." For the rest of the afternoon, he left her tethered by her neck on the bed, coming in periodically to check on Nikki and to offer her bread and water. He was encouraging her. "You're doing fine, you'll be home soon," he said. Towards midnight, he took her to the bathroom for a shower and ordered her to wash herself thoroughly. And then it was time for the ordeal to end. He dressed Nikki in a school jumper and track pants and put her back in the car. He drove for up to an hour, saying he and his friend had selected 2 spots suitable for Nikki's release. But now he'd changed his mind. Finally, he stopped the car, and after 5 minutes walking, he made Nikki change her clothes. He walked her for another 5 minutes across parkland. Once he made to leave her, but changed his mind and came back. Finally, he left her crouched in a bush. When she opened her eyes, Nikki discovered she'd been left outside an electricity substation. It was in Tennyson Avenue, Kew.
The youngster, with her eyes still taped, was dubbed by her captor in Tennyson Street, Kew, about 1:45 yesterday morning.
The safe release of Nicola Lynas was big news and drew a very important piece of information, a sighting that matched what Fiona and Nicola Lynas had told police. It was Friday morning after midnight. A milkman was doing his rounds in Eglinton Street, Kew. He was standing at the back of his van arranging the crates when he heard someone stumble behind him. The milker was vigilant as he was concerned about being robbed on his milk run. I turned and looked behind me. I remember seeing a man. He looked at me and I stared at him for about 10 seconds. I'd describe him as European, Mediterranean, Greek or Italian, around 30s. At about 5 a.m, the milkman heard on the radio that Nicola Lynas had been found hours earlier in the Kew area. The spot on Eglinton Street where he saw the man was about 500 metres away from the substation where Lynas was released. It was possible the milko had just seen the offender returning to his vehicle. Later that day, the milkman helped create an identical image of the man he'd seen. He was about 5'8" to 5'10", with stocky but not muscular build. His hair was unruly and longish at the back. He was wearing white tennis-style runners. The footwear was significant because police found muddy shoe prints in and outside of the Lynas house. It's believed the tracks were made by either a Dunlop Omni Sport or Dunlop Catch shoe, a female shoe designed for netball. Presbyterian Ladies College, where Nikki attended school, had an ongoing order for these shoes, but police couldn't find any nexus between sales lists and this offence. The eyewitness account was very similar to Nikki and Fiona's description of the man and gave police a firm target to pursue. But there was precious little else for police to go on. There were no other biological, botanical or forensic exhibits collected, except for the very tip of a fingerprint that was lifted from the rearview mirror of the Lynas family car. It could not be matched to anyone in the investigation or anyone known to have used the car. Police tried to establish a nexus between the Wills and Lynas cases based on analysis of the physical descriptions of this offender given by the girls. Lynas and Wills were excellent witnesses and gave lots of helpful detail about the man, his appearance, demeanour and his voice. However, there were significant differences in the descriptions, raising doubts that this was the same offender. Sharon said her attacker was 5'7" to 5'11" with a thin build. Nikki said the suspect was around the same height, but he had a large build. He was overweight with a paunch or beer belly and thick arms. Sharon remembered a beard or a moustache, whereas Nikki recalled he just had stubble. 19 months had elapsed between the two attacks, enough time for an offender to put on weight or to change facial hair, especially an offender that might be trying to throw police off his scent. A man's voice and vocal patterns are harder to conceal. The voices of the two offenders were also very different. Sharon's attacker was well-spoken and fluent with no accent. Nikki's had a gruff, uneducated way of speaking. He referred to Nikki and her sister as yous when giving them orders. He swore a lot and he was nervous and agitated on the crime scene, whereas Sharon's abductor was cool and calm. Despite the unresolved differences, many detectives suspected this was the work of one offender. Chris O'Connor was the original investigator on the Lynas case. He acknowledges the problems in identification. In the Wills case, the offender was also seen by Sharon's parents. In the Lynas case, police relied on Nikki and to some extent her sister Fiona, who also saw the masked intruder.
But if you accept that they are the same offender, why are you saying they're same offenders? Okay, you can make that out with circumstances, similar facts. However, how do we explain this perception of this person with multiple people compared to this perception of this child, teenager, but who is the most lucid and intelligent witness? receptive witness, where it's not the same person from their descriptions.
Sharon Wills and Nicky Lynas both had a long time to pick up important details. Sharon was held captive for 18 hours, Nicky for 50 hours. Police were expecting another attack. The offender was bound to strike again, they believed.
What concerns us is the likelihood of this offender will strike again and perhaps commit an offence worse than what he's already done.
During Nicky Lynas's 50-hour ordeal, police asked criminal psychologist Tim Watson-Munro for his opinion on what Mr. Cruel might do next.
I said he'll let her go, I suspect, and he did. And I made the comment, and I'm not sure about the next one because I felt that he was escalating.
The next one was Karmein Chan, 9 months later. Watson-Munro hoped for the best, but expected the worst.
They have deviant fantasies, and at some point they then find that they want to see what it's really like, so they start acting out on the fantasies, and it keeps going then until they're caught, and it may escalate further. So it may end in death, it may end in them murdering, raping and all the rest of it. And there's been other cases around the globe that have spoken to that.
There was no doubt in the public's mind who'd abducted Karmein, despite the lack of direct evidence. The modus operandi was the most powerful connection to the earlier cases, portraying a compulsive sex offender whose behaviour was escalating. And as the days passed with no return, Watson-Munro's bleak prophecy had come true. For the investigators seconded to the Spectrum Taskforce, this was a unique challenge. None of them had worked all of the 10 files under review. Everything was on paper. The Chan residence was the only live crime scene to work. They could look at Lynas and Wills through the lens of the Chan case.
The forming of the task force, of course, with a very recent crime right on top of it, the opportunity to work that crime scene, of course, was an absolute godsend to the investigation at that point. My name is Jeff Branch. Back in 1991, I was a detective with the Major Crime Squad, Victoria Police. Just transferred there at that time onto a crew that had been working on a series of abductions and rapes of young girls.
Jeff Branch's crew had doubts about whether they could link Lynas and Wills to the Chan case.
There was a lack of information we had to work with, to be honest. There wasn't a great deal of confidence in the crew that I was on that we, certainly in those 2 abductions that they'd previously worked on, that they had anything else that they could do with the resources that they had. Initially, our crew went back to look at previous suspects. They were people that had been previously identified as potential. Certainly they'd been cleared, or perhaps not cleared, but unable to link to any of those other crimes. But of course it was prudent in the circumstances to make sure that they were where they should have been and that they didn't have anybody secreted away in the house where they were living. So there was about, from memory, about 6 to 8 of those. We then started to get tasks with IRs or information reports that were coming through Crime Stoppers and various other channels. And we would basically collate them into areas, and we worked mainly afternoons through into the evenings to make sure that we had the best chance of finding people at home, and just went around knocking on doors. And we would do that day in, day out. And that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. In the first week and 2 weeks of Karmein's disappearance, there was a lot of information came through. Some of it was absolute garbage, but still needed to be taken care of, still needed to be cleared. We had the usual run-of-the-mill disgruntled girlfriends, pointing the finger towards their ex-boyfriends and ex-husbands, etc.
My name's Stuart Cooper. I'm an ex-police detective. I was seconded to the Spectrum Taskforce in 1992 to investigate the disappearance of Karmein Chan. I was in charge of the information inflow, which was just huge. Basically, it all came in through Crime Stoppers originally. The odd phone call direct to or to a local police station, but the majority of it was generated through Crime Stoppers. I had to go through every information report. I had a crew working for me as well. I think I had 6 VicPol members, and I think we had 8 or 9. We had stenographers and doing all sorts of stuff. So yeah, there was probably 15, I suppose. we turned every leaf before we put it together, and then we would hand it on to a crew sergeant who would then delegate that job, right? Everything's been done. They've identified this or such and such a car, and here's a list of the cars, and all that sort of stuff. So we tried to do as much as we could to take the pressure off the investigators so that they could actually investigate. You'd have psychics ringing up, and you couldn't discount psychics because that may be just someone with a guilty conscience.
Investigators endured disappointment after disappointment. One of the strongest clues concerned a Bedford van. Witnesses had seen it parked at a vacant lot 300 metres from the Chan residence. On the night of Karmein's abduction, a police dog tracked her scent to this lot.
The vehicle was dark blue Bedford van, quite distinctive. Two bubble windows either side, very 1970s. The vehicle was seen parked in a vacant lot from memory. It had been parked there. A witness had seen it, and again, because of its distinctive nature of the vehicle. There was a chap who owned several taxis, and a lot of the vehicles that we had described being around the Templestowe area, around Karmein Chan's house at the time, were able to clear quickly, belonging to taxi drivers that had parked their vehicles around there. That became significant. There was also evidence from the witnesses that they'd been driven around in a vehicle down in the footwell, and of course a van would have been a perfect vehicle for that. And so our assumption was that van was very important to the investigation, very important to clear it or to locate the van. It had dark rear bumper bar with a 3XY sticker on the back. Now, the 3XY sticker became important because, again, one of the victims recalled while she was being held the offender listening to 3XY. I believe it was a matchmaker's program he was listening to. Now, again, 3XY stickers were quite common back then. Of course, every time an outside broadcast was done by 3XY, they'd hand those stickers out all over the place. We spent over 2 years looking for that van. We looked in New South Wales, we looked in Queensland. Many, many vans were cleared because they didn't have those distinctive windows with the dark bumper bar and then the 3XY sticker on the back. We were still confident that van was so closely linked to what we were looking for that we made that a priority of ours. At the end of the task force, on a completely unrelated firearms and drugs warrant in Callista, my partner and I noticed the van sitting in the backyard had been there for many years, and the owner of that van, of course, was the subject of that firearms and drugs warrant that we were executing at the time. And we were able to speak to him about the van and why it might have been in that particular area. And as it turns out, he was a taxi driver. It was, again, just a failure of that particular witness, the chap that owned, to remember to give us that guy's name. He was quite a slim Asian man, so it was unlikely that he was going to be our person. But of course, the van was exactly as described.
We were doing 16, 18 hours a day for weeks and weeks and weeks. The mindset changed once they found her. The more it went on, the longer you felt grim about it, because that hadn't been the MO at all. My opinion was that the guy was, in his own way, careful, caring, in his own way. A troubled mind, but not a nasty mind. I don't know if that makes sense, but he was someone that wanted to be with young kids, but knew he couldn't be for any length of time, so he did what he had to do in his own mind, but then let him go because there was enough of his mindset to say, well, I can't keep going like this, it's not fair on anybody, and I'll let it go.
The murder of Karmein Chan was completely at odds with the previous modus operandi of these crimes and destroyed many assumptions. The response of the task force was to cast a very wide net for information.
Because there was so much information, it was much quicker, and a better way to run the investigation, from my point of view, was to eliminate as many people as we could.
Jeff Branch's crew went undercover to follow up on Nicola Lynas' memory of hearing aircraft passing not far from the residence where she was held captive. She'd also given a detailed description of the bathroom.
Okay, so with the description of the bathroom, we thought that there was an opportunity to identify that house. Keep in mind, there was also evidence from Nicola Lynas, as I recall, that gave us an area that she was held, which was under a flight path from Tullamarine. She recalls large international jets taking off, and from memory, I think it was runway 45. At the time, there was a project going on which was well known around the place. I think it was called Sewer Busters by Melbourne Water, basically trying to catch people out with their illegal plumbing out there. And so we just piggybacked on that program and got some Melbourne Water uniforms and a couple of vehicles and some IDs and went around knocking on doors, asking to inspect bathrooms. And we searched hundreds of houses under that flight path with no luck.
A huge effort was underway to identify and catch this offender before he could strike again, and that seemed a certainty. But a number of detectives have never been convinced that Karmein Chan was the victim of a serial rapist.
As far as I could see, there was no evidence to put her in with that lot, where the other 4 girls were, they were abducted, driven around disorientated, and then sexually assaulted. For all we know, there mightn't have been a Mr. Pearl, but in her case, as you know, they found her body some 12 months later, and it had the hallmarks of an execution. Well, that just doesn't fit.
In the next episode of Creating Mr. Cruel, we examine the lingering questions around Karmein Chan's death and an alternative theory explored by police but never properly resolved.
A number of us actually question that, in other words, is Chan really part of these other 3? Are we dealing with the same offender? Are we dealing with the same set of circumstances? From a personal point of view, I don't think we were, but the bottom line is that wasn't properly explored. It's one of those cases that just hasn't got off the ground. It's that simple. The thing about it is there's still more investigations to do. It's not too late.
A Podchape production.
Welcome to episode 5 of Creating Mr. Cruel. I'm your host, Adam Shand.
Detectives said the man, armed with a pistol and wearing a dark-coloured balaclava, was intent on capturing the child.
We're dealing with a very cunning person, a person who we regard as very dangerous.
The man carried a handgun and a 35-centimetre long kitchen knife with a black plastic handle and serrated blade.
Early in the investigation into Karmein Chan's abduction, the conduct of her father John raised concerns for some police. For others, there was a logical explanation for everything he did, and his association with some dubious individuals with criminal connections. They say that doubts about John Chan could come from cultural misunderstandings and even racism. Still, John Chan's decision not to tell his wife when he took the call from home that Karmein was gone is puzzling. Then Police Chief Commissioner Kel Blair was a regular visitor to the Chan's restaurant. He regarded Phyllis as a friend. John Chan he barely knew.
Phyllis was very volatile and she had a really volatile nature, and I can perhaps understand why he was a bit reluctant to break that news to her because her reactions were not always as one would possibly expect.
The idea that there was something deeper going on in the Karmein Chan case has lingered in the minds of investigators. There was always a worrying lack of direct evidence that linked one offender to the murder of Karmein Chan and the other abductions. There's more work to be done.
I think the best way to put it is it was single-focused. Yeah, there was a whole lot of other aspects to the job, particularly Chan's background, his connections that weren't explored and should have been investigated. While all these other avenues of inquiry haven't been thoroughly explored, and I use the word thoroughly, there's still a whole lot of missing links.
Another veteran of the Spectrum Taskforce, retired Sergeant Chris O'Connor, also doubts the single offender theory.
From a dispassionate criminal investigation perspective, my belief is that Nicky Lynas and Sharon Wills were abducted by the same person. Anybody else is up for conjecture.
On the night of April 12, 1992, John Chan was working at the family restaurant in Eltham, a short drive from home in Templestowe. It was a busy Saturday night, and his wife Phyllis was working alongside him. After 9 p.m, John received a call from home from one of his daughters. Karmein had been taken. He didn't relay this shocking news to Phyllis, and he didn't call police. Instead, he drove home and checked the house and grounds for Karmein. Only then did John Chan contact police, costing the investigation vital time. It raised eyebrows right up to the Chief Commissioner, Kel Glare.
Oh, well, it's not usual behaviour. I would have thought that, the immediate reaction would be to call the police, but if someone, has a few problems of their own, it may be that the last thing he wanted was immediate attention from police.
John Chan kept his emotions in check and rarely spoke to media, leaving that to Phyllis, whose anguish broke the hearts of every parent in the nation.
Phyllis was absolutely devastated, and as one would expect. She lived in the forlorn hope that Karmein would be found alive. I think she was just mystified, I suppose, as to why Karmein had been a victim. I used to have dinner at Phyllis's restaurant on a fairly regular basis. Well, the food was excellent. I had very little to do with John. I think I wouldn't have spoken to him more than twice. I know that he was the focus of attention for quite some time. And if I recall correctly, not too long after he took off and I think went to Queensland. But he was certainly under the microscope, there's no question about that. But I think the chances of him being the offender were negligible, frankly, but not to say that he rules out his associates.
A former detective who reviewed the investigation into John Chan's background has spoken to me on the condition we disguise his voice. He says that John Chan had two associates that drew particular interest from police. I've chosen not to name these individuals, and I make no allegations against them. The first was a supplier to the Chan's restaurant.
Well, the information we had was that he was a questionable character. I believe they did do financial background on him to show that his income, or his assets, outweighed his income and his lifestyle. When I was working at the task force, these conversations would come up, and there were a couple of characters mentioned. He was one of them. The other one was who was apparently a receiver, lived up in Sydney, I believe. These matters were talked about, but by that stage they'd already been explored to a certain extent, but clearly not enough.
Stewie Cooper was the crime analyst for Spectrum. He compiled a summary of the investigation into John, and he's reading it again after 30 years.
Parental background: father has lived in Australia since 1975, is a restaurateur and property developer by profession. Owns several restaurants in the general vicinity of the home address. Is also involved in the ownership development of another restaurant. These restaurants are reputable and well attended. Has owned his own home, large modern home in a very affluent upmarket location for the past 6 years, and has spent considerable money on renovations and additions to the same. A small mortgage on the home of $70,000. Several unconfirmed reports regarding his business and financial background relating to gambling debts, overseas financial backing and business ventures bordering bankruptcy. Chan lightly questioned these allegations and offered any assistance into any legal or financial investigation.
This sentence just jumps off the page. In an investigation where no stone was left unturned, John Chan was lightly questioned on these potentially significant matters. For instance, in the Nicola Lynas abduction, the family's possible links to crime had to be eliminated as a possible motive in the crime. In Karmein's case, John Chan was known to have criminal associates. These men were spoken to by police at the time, but no further action was taken. Reviewing the file, this raised a red flag for our unnamed detective.
The information we had at the time was that Chan was owed a lot of money. There were quite substantial debts, as we understand, and none of that was looked into.
Inquiries revealed that John Chan had some commercial disputes over fit-outs on his properties. Nothing unusual in that industry, but it was relevant as an alternative motive for the abduction.
Well, the information I heard, and I didn't see it firsthand, but it was on the lines of he would get a restaurant fitted out, invoices would have been presented for the work done or whatever, and he just wouldn't pay. Now, surely that would have been a line of inquiry just on its own, his financial situation, because let's face it, that could go to motive. So these are things that have to be looked at. I'm not saying for 1 second that that's the case, but if they haven't been looked at, you can't say either way, can you?
Police have maintained that graffiti spray-painted on the Chan's car at their Serpils Road home on the night Karmein disappeared nearly 3 weeks ago was a red herring, and references to payback, more to come and Asian drug dealing were meant to put detectives on the wrong track.
In May 1991, with Karmein missing, John Chan made a rare media appearance to say that his business dealings were not linked to his daughter's abduction.
John Chan said rumours that the messages were connected with Karmein's kidnapping had distressed the family and appealed to the public to ignore them.
So I'm a bit worried, that man maybe misunderstand I'm doing something wrong and they take my girl. If they know I'm clean and the police already check on me and they will release my daughter as soon as possible.
What parents would be worried about all those sort of matters when his daughter's, and after 12 months clearly been murdered. His daughter's been, stolen from him, and why would you bring in anything else? I would have thought from his point of view, he'd be sitting back thinking, well, this is so serious. What can I do to help the police get to the bottom of this? That's what I would have thought.
It's hard to find someone who was disgruntled with a feed at an Eltham restaurant and going back 3 years to you cut my power off. You couldn't draw nexuses like that. It was more an individual thing, and this is where I'm not saying that that's a reason why they shouldn't have investigated the allegations about John and his gambling debts and all that sort of stuff. And that was always going to be, especially when you get into Asians, that everybody's an Asian crime lord. Basically, if you're doing well as an Asian, you couldn't have done it properly.
Stewie Cooper is a believer in the gospel that the same offender committed all 4 abductions, from Lower Plenty in 1987 to Karmein's abduction and murder in 1991. For him, the graffiti on the family car was a red herring to distract the investigation. This also became Victoria Police's official position.
The payback theory was always, it could never be discounted, but the crime itself is not a payback crime. It's a passion crime.
As a crime analyst, Stewie Cooper's job was to collate all the relevant information and evidence gathered and condense it into a form that allowed the bosses to make decisions. For some reason, he wasn't provided with information about John Chan's associates. He believes he would have included it in the document. This is what he wrote back then.
Appears that he is in a stable financial situation. His restaurants are in joint ownership with his wife, and consensus is that his wife wears the pants, although Mr. Chan is the worker. Chan and his wife are married by Chinese tradition only and are not recognised as legally married in this country. There has been some tension between husband and wife over recent years. They have separate rooms and share the house for financial reasons and to give the children a stable background. Mother is also a hard worker and spends much of her time at the restaurants, is very business-wise and appears to rule the roost. As can be seen by husband's background, she has few other interests apart from working at the restaurant and time at home. Both parents spend a considerable amount of time away from their children. Thus, children spend time alone, and some days they are babysat by persons that clean their house for the Chans, usually a relative of the family.
The theory that Karmein Chan's abduction was linked to a possible underworld dispute was boosted by recent revelations from retired Victorian homicide detective Ron Iddles. In 2020, Iddles told the Australian True Crime podcast that a crook dying of cancer had told him that Mr. Cruel was a notorious armed robber. Iddles later told the Herald Sun's Andrew Rule that this informant was an armed robber named Alfred Hugh Gay. Gay, who had terminal cancer, told Iddles that he believed Mr. Cruel was Norman Leung Lee, the only man charged and later acquitted of the Great Bookie robbery of 1976. Gay said Lee had a schoolgirl fantasy and was an occasional cross-dresser. Gay told Iddles that Lee owned a house in Eltham where he took girls he'd abducted. This home he shared with his wife and 2 teenage children. Lee was killed while attempting to rob the Ansett terminal in July 1992, a few months after Karmein's remains were discovered. This seemed to provide an explanation for why the abduction stopped after this time. There was also support for the idea that an armed robber could also be a sexual deviant. Tim Watson-Munro is a criminal psychologist.
Yeah, it is. And the research says that psychopaths, as I like to call them, they're described now as antisocial personalities. But psychopaths have a very high threshold for anxiety. So the thought of me robbing a bank, no chance. Even if I wanted the money, I'd be going weak at the knees at the thought. These guys, it's no big deal for them. And so it suggests that because of that, they can do daring things that mere mortals would only think about doing maybe. So they have a high threshold for anxiety. They're not worried about consequences terribly much. And as psychopaths, they're not at all worried about the victims.
My name's George Haitley. I'm a former member of the Victoria Police Force, attached to the Protective Security Groups, in particular the Special Operations Group, as a sergeant, and my role was a tactical team leader.
Former Victoria Police tactical leader George Haitley was the man who shot Normie Lee during the Ansett raid. After Ron Iddles' revelations, Haitley began wondering whether he might have also killed Mr. Cruel into the bargain.
I heard that information and the fact that we'd killed him. It did cross my mind that, if it is true, what we did was justified, and now morally I thought, we may have saved some other young people, young girls.
Police carried out surveillance on Lee and his fellow robbers Stephen Barchi and Stephen Asling when they learned the trio was planning a big armed robbery. A picture of a meticulous, careful crook came through.
So you'd have to put him in the category of an old crook, and obviously good crooks don't get caught. So you'd have to put him in that category. There's Mr. Careful, whatever you want to call him. Whereas Asling and Barchi were a lot younger and obviously hyped up about doing a big job, and not only the rewards of that job, but the fact that they probably got a lot of excitement out of an adrenaline rush doing it. So I would put Norman Lee in that category of a very astute criminal going about his business.
There are enough elements of Ron Iddles' information that seem to fit, enough to excite interest that the Great Bookie robber could also have been Mr. Cruel. Some internet pundits have taken to calling him Mr. Careful, a career criminal with the skills to break into family homes to satisfy a perverse sexuality that delivered a rush of adrenaline. The timing of his death is also attractive. However, timing is also the biggest problem for the Normie Lee theory. The Lee family sold the Eltham house in 1988, a year before the Lynas abduction and nearly 3 years before Karmein Chan's. We went to the Eltham Street and door-knocked the residence until we found someone who was resident at the same time as the Lee family.
My name is Marjorie. That's Ken.
Firth.
We're the Firths that lived across the road.
Ken and Marjorie Firth have lived in the street since the 1960s. They built their own home directly across from the house the Lees bought in 1985. The Firths like to know what goes on in the street, so they leave their bedroom curtains open. Normie's movements at night raise some suspicion from these vigilant neighbours.
I'd see the lights come up the drive because they'd flash in through our bedroom, and I'd see it was him going out and just see him come home at some strange hour. He was coming at all hours and coming home at all hours, and when he might be going out at 1 in the morning and 2 in the morning and that sort of thing. It wasn't 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night going to a shift or something like that. He did say that he worked at his father's factory and he did night shift because he was the maintenance man. That's what he told me. And I took that as being true.
Marjorie Firth tried to make friends with Lee's wife Lorraine, once inviting her over for coffee. Lorraine seemed to have one eye on the door.
She didn't talk much about what they were doing, but I was focusing on the way she was sitting, which was very unusual to me because my friends don't sit like that. She was like this.
Facing away from you?
Yeah. Just across the room, same room, just out there. And nobody sits like that. I'm pretty naive that way. I don't judge people, and I wasn't judging her, but I just felt it was very strange.
Things became even stranger in the street after the news of a local robbery got around. Ken remembers a house had been robbed in nearby Templestowe, and a stash of jewellery from the heist had been found by the river.
Well, I heard on the radio or read in the paper that all this jewellery had been found at the other side of the bridge on Fitzsimmons Lane. And it was just after that they disappeared. Well, I think it was within days, might have been the next day even. It was about that time, right when that report came out, the jewellery had been found. And I said to Marjorie at the time, I wouldn't be surprised if he's done that, and that's why they've disappeared.
Ken Firth would see members of the Lee family occasionally after they had moved out. They still owned the property, and it stood vacant until the sale.
Well, we just saw a car coming, they'd drive down the drive and drive in underneath and park. That's all. You couldn't see the car at all. They were parking in under the garage thing there underneath the house. And because I was curious too what was going on, I'd just see them go again. You'd just see them come occasionally. They'd only be there for, only seemed like not even 5 minutes, and then they'd be gone again. They asked me that if I saw anything or saw them come, could I immediately phone them and let them know. And I think it only happened once, but by the time I phoned, they'd gone.
This seems to discount any possibility that Normie Lee was Mr. Cruel. The dates don't match, and if there was anything nefarious going on, the Firths would have contacted police, who already had their eye on Normie Lee. Lee had returned to his normal stomping ground in Melbourne's inner city by the time of his death. There is no more evidence linking Lee to any of the attacks that Spectrum reviewed, but Marjorie Firth has her suspicions.
I just wondered at the time if it was a connection, because that was also he wasn't touching me. It was a different story. But Mr. Cruel came up in my mind. Were they connected?
The final word on this matter comes from Stephen Barchi, who was Normie Lee's accomplice in the disastrous Ansett robbery that cost Lee his life. Barchi was also shot by police, but survived to tell his story to me in my weekly podcast, Real Crime with Adam Shand. He is absolutely certain that his friend was not Mr. Cruel.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous, Very hurtful for his kids, his wife. It's not something, it just was not true.
Because you were with him through this period?
I was with him, yes, through that period from the early 80s. So from about 1982 onwards, I was pretty close to him. I spent a lot of time with him. I'd often just go past one of his factories and spend some time with him, just have a coffee with him and, just talk and have a laugh but I did spend a lot of time with him, and he definitely was not Mr. Cruel.
Yeah, because that's a pretty heinous allegation because he's not around to defend himself.
In the next episode of Creating Mr. Cruel, the wheels fall off the Spectrum investigation. As public confidence wanes, a crucial DNA test fails to provide the breakthrough the police are desperately seeking.
Oh, I think there was a huge amount of hope. You know, they were so desperate to solve the Mr. Cruel, and understandably, that's what everyone wanted. It was a devastating result to the task force.
It's looking more likely that the Mr. Cruel serial rapist is in fact a series of rapists, and they've all got away.
That connection fell apart, so did they ever think about maybe trying to solve the other cases that now aren't connected? Or did they just go, oh well, like, put those ones in the bin?
And a survivor comes to terms with her experience.
You should not say to a young girl, you will never get over this is a fate worse than death, and what a terrible thing's been taken from you. I'm bullshit. I mean, really, of course you should be saying you are going to get over this, and you're stronger than this, and you're not going to let this, steal your happiness or your peace of mind. You're going to move on from this shithead.
Podchape production.
Welcome to episode 6 of Creating Mr. Cruel. I'm your host, Adam Shand. Of all the conventional wisdom about Mr. Cruel, one aspect endures: his detailed understanding of forensic procedures. The story goes he left nothing behind to identify him. No DNA or other biological material, which made catching him nigh on impossible. This has led some to believe in a single offender, who might have been a police officer or somebody with a law enforcement or forensic science background. My investigation has completely exposed this as a myth. The facts simply do not fit. In almost all the cases reviewed by the Spectrum Taskforce, there was biological evidence left behind. The so-called forensic genius made plenty of mistakes that today would have seen him quickly identified and brought to justice. My investigation has revealed that in 2 cases, the attacks in 1985 on Anthea and Sharon Wills in 1988, the police did have some DNA from the offender. In the case of Sharon Wills, the DNA material was recorded in a summary that I've obtained. Sharon was medically examined and a very small amount of spermatozoa was located on a groin swab. Sharon was dressed in a men's shirt by the offender for her release. And my investigation has revealed the garment also yielded more biological evidence. In the pocket, a light brown human scalp hair and dark brown animal hairs were found. If these samples could have been matched to exhibits from other cases, it would have been a breakthrough for a failing investigation.
It would have absolutely been a ace in the hole.
A former Spectrum Taskforce member has spoken to me about the biological evidence on the condition of anonymity. Only a few people knew of the Wills evidence, and it has never been made public until now. The former detective has come forward in the hope of reigniting the investigation. Victoria Police has refused to confirm or deny the existence of this DNA material. In 1988, when it was collected, no sexual assault case had been solved through DNA in Victoria, but that would soon change. Wisely, the DNA exhibit was kept for future use.
Someone had the foresight to, even though DNA wasn't heard of back then or before Spectrum anyway, someone had the mouse to at least hang on to that sort of evidence, those sort of bodily fluids, when back then the only thing that they had was matching blood. That was about the extent of it. So for someone to hang on to that stuff showed real foresight, knowing that, sooner or later there will be processes that...
Another former task force member, Jeff Branch, also knew about the DNA in the Sharon Wills case. But you're aware of the DNA material?
Sure, yeah. And I'm assuming that the DNA evidence is still available to police there. You would hope it would be, and you would hope that they've paid attention to that over the years.
The tiny amount of DNA collected was fragile and not necessarily enough to create a full genetic profile at the time. And the offender database they could match it against was still very small. Today, even a partial sample can be enough to identify an offender. However, in 1992, this was the best shot the task force had.
I think there was a huge amount of hope. They were so desperate to solve the Mr. Cruel, and understandably, that's what everyone wanted. Everyone wanted this matter solved because they were horrendous crimes. You just couldn't have someone like that loose in the neighbourhood. If what we're dealing with is the same offender, but you still got to keep your mind open, and you still can't rely on any single aspect. For us to prove beyond reasonable doubt would require not only the DNA but also corroboration.
That corroboration would come through matching the Wills DNA to other attacks.
There were two inquiries. There was a Hampton inquiry. A number of young girls, prepubescent girls I think they used to refer them to, were abducted, disorientated and raped or sexually assaulted in some form or other. And then you had the Mr. Cruel. Well, my understanding was that there was DNA from both of those. And what they were desperately hoping for was that those two DNA would match to give us the same offender.
It's understood the DNA collected from the attack on Anthea in February 1985 in Hampton was compared to the sample from the Wills case. It's believed the samples were sent to America for analysis. The comparison took months to perform, while detectives anxiously waited for a positive result.
Now, my understanding is that didn't happen, and I think it was devastating. It was a devastating result to the task force, but it also highlighted another matter. This was a serious crime in America and a lot more common over in the United States, whereas over here, that sort of crime was pretty much unheard of. It was a bit of a rarity, so we really didn't have all that much experience in dealing with that sort of a crime. So I think they were very keen to say, well, we've got the same MO with both groups when the DNA didn't match. It just goes to show you that sometimes the same MO. And, I've always made this comparison that if you go around to Melbourne and check out all the burglaries and they've all got Jimmy marks, does that mean it's done by the same offender? No, it doesn't. What it means is that probably 30 or 40 different burglars.
The 10 cases that Spectrum tried to link to Mr. Cruel included victims from the age of 31 down to 11 years of age. Jeff Branch's crew had doubts about the links.
There was some doubt that came up in our crew, certainly when we were talking about in the context of why would our suspect go from attacking adult women to suddenly looking at children.
The failure to match the DNA destroyed this hypothesis of the same offender operating from at least 1985 in Hampton through to 1991 in Karmein Chan's case.
The best way to describe it is when the DNA came back as not a match, I think it was devastating because, once that was gone, they were pretty much back to square one, whereas the DNA gave them some hope. It was just a terrible day.
After this crushing disappointment, the investigation had nowhere to go. The possible nexus between Hampton and the later attacks had been demolished. Yet police did not release this information, and the media remained deeply invested in the now discredited one-offender theory. They also continued to link the abduction and murder of Karmein Chan to 3 other attacks. The 1987 attack in Lower Plenty, the abductions of Sharon Wills in 1988 and Nicola Lynas in 1990. Without any evidence to corroborate these links, it was drawing a very long bow. Our former Spectrum detective believes more work should have gone into the business dealings of John Chan to eliminate the possibility of another motive. How many red flags came up around John Chan and his business dealings and his associates?
I know that there were a number of red flags, so I didn't have anything to do with them specifically, but during quite often the conversations we had in the task force, he kept company with people whose, how would we say, honesty and integrity probably wasn't right up there.
We learned in our investigation that a man named lived 3 doors up from the location of the Lower Plenty attack, but also had a connection through to John Chan through another party. And so this was a serious line of inquiry for a long time, trying to connect Darryl Kerr, who also had connections to police officers. It's very complicated, but there was a continued focus on trying to link Chan's associates to other events in this timeline between Lower Plenty and Karmein's abduction and murder.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, both those names were brought up and their investigations conducted around those names and also other names in relation to businesses, because obviously one of the considerations was this a payback of some sort? Now, that still hasn't been explored, to my knowledge.
Do you think that John Chan's associations were sufficiently investigated and eliminated?
No, I don't think they were. And I say that because what I did know from other members of the task force was that he had quite a few outstanding debts. I believe he was involved in hiring people for business renovations and all that sort of thing, and then just refused to point blank to pay. So that could go for a motive as well. I believe in the Chinese community. That can be some sort of a dangerous way to go if you employ people and then deliberately don't pay them. I believe that they can have consequences for that sort of conduct. So, having said that, I think these were aspects of the investigation that weren't properly explored, and I think they should have been, and that's why I'm at pains to make any connection between the three and the Templestowe matter. I just don't think we got there.
So it's possible that this assumption that all these 4 cases were connected was wrong, and also allowed possibly more than one offender to go through.
Yeah, it is possible because, the matter needed to be investigated further. It's still outstanding as we speak now. And all these matters have still haven't been properly looked at. Now, until you get on top of that, you can't say one way or the other. It's still open-ended. Okay, so in other words, they still haven't got a result.
These matters were never fully resolved, and the dubious links with other cases have persisted until today. The murder of Karmein Chan remains an open investigation, with a $1 million reward on offer for information leading to the conviction of the person or persons responsible. The brutal execution remains inextricably linked with the Mr. Cruel legend, that Karmein must have seen her abductor's face, and therefore he had no choice but to kill her. However, the problem is, there's no evidence to support this. It's just a theory. Senior police of the day believed the murder investigation was mishandled. Rather than follow the evidence to a possible offender, the task force tried to fit their Mr. Cruel profile to the crime.
My name is Peter Halloran, and in 1992 I was in charge of the homicide squad, and that's the time period that Karmein Chan's body was recovered.
So do you remember that evening, the dog walker on the Merry Creek there at Thomastown found human remains? I think Constables Farley and Gallagher responded from Thomastown. And how long after was the homicide squad brought into that matter?
called almost immediately to attend the scene, and as is typical of all deaths or recoveries of bodies of that type of thing, priority is notifying the homicide squad, and they attend immediately.
Whilst we don't have any positive information at this point of time, as I've said to you, it is quite a possibility that it is in fact Karmein.
And it was a shocking thing, because he was this ill 13-year-old girl who'd been shot in the head 3 times, I believe.
Yes, she'd been, yes. And look, anything involving children is horrifying. And for her, Karmein, to be abducted from home and shot in the head is terrifying and raises a whole host of questions.
Peter Halloran was known for a cool, analytical approach to homicide investigations. While media fervently speculated that Mr. Cruel had gone from sexual assault to murder, Halloran was not prepared to take that leap of logic without evidence.
How often, in your experience, has a child molester or abductor gone on to be a murderer? There are specific types in these criminals, I think.
Yes, there is, and whilst it's difficult to stereotype these people, but it's unusual to have a string of abductions and sex offences and then go into a blatant murder, shooting a child in the head and burying them is unusual.
The scene didn't offer a lot. Do you remember the circumstances of where the body was found and what the situation was?
Yes. The body was buried in a parkland. It hadn't been there all that long, and it was very unusual to find a child murdered and buried and shot. And it raised a lot of issues and concerns at the time. Initially, we assigned a crew from the homicide squad, at least one crew, to attend. And we also manage the crime scene people on site. And the idea is to protect the crime scene and that may be a small or large, and the homicide detectives will determine whether it's the extent of an area to be secured for the crime scene, and then make sure it's maintained until there's a forensic examination of the area. Look for any evidence whatsoever.
Because you weren't helped by the fact that it appeared that a grader had been working in that area prior to this and had taken off a layer of earth that revealed the remains. I think a skull was found first.
Yeah, and I think that, there's a lot of factors that come into play, and not only the workings in the area, the weather and time frames and so on, but the evidence then comes with the body, not so much the immediate vicinity.
Yeah, but I guess how a body is buried is important, whether it's a shallow or a deep grave.
Of course, all those. Talking
Talking about haste or someone with time on their hands, and
whether it's preparation, pre-dug grave, or whether it's something that's done in the short-term shallow graves, and probably not planned.
And was the body just skeletal remains, or were there still tissue?
There was, other than, I don't want to say too much of it's published for the family side, but there were some remains, that skeletal remains plus. Yeah.
So it gave you a rough time frame, because I think reading that she had been taken the year before, and I think the reports at the time suggested that the condition of the body had
deteriorated.
It indicated that she might have been killed quite soon after being abducted.
Yes, that's right.
It's an odd one because, as I say, Mr. Cruel was not a child murderer, although the Spectrum Taskforce, and we'll get to that, how that they got involved later, but the Spectrum Taskforce was working on the assumption that, going back to an earlier case where an offender had said to a girl in Hampton, "My freedom is more important than your life," and therefore perhaps Karmein had seen his face and was able to identify him.
That's one possible explanation, and there are a number of question marks in relation to the death, but yeah, as I say, it's highly unusual, and you would wonder why. Is it somebody that, as you say, recognised the face, again, which is probably unlikely, or is it some form of revenge, or is there something that occurred that caused the need to dispose of an eyewitness? But then what about all the other potential witnesses over the years?
All those things were the normal kind of inquiries you'd be making as a homicide chief, assigning a crew to work the case on its own merit. But that didn't last very long. What actually happened in terms of who was looking after the case?
No, well, after they finished at the crime scene, and I think it was a day or two later that the decision was made that the Mr. Krill Task Force should take over the murder because of indications. Some people thought the indications were that it was a typical Mr. Krill crime.
Who made that decision? Do you remember?
I think it was the head of the crime department, Kevin Holliday.
Doc Holliday. He was a real legend in his time, and a man of strong opinions, a man who liked to keep things close to his chest. Do you remember his demeanour and the way he operated?
Yes, he was different, and he had superintendents who would feed him the information from the various areas and so on. And whether they did on this occasion, I don't know. But the decision was to leave it with the task force, and that was it.
How did you feel about that as homicide chief?
I thought the wise way of doing it would have been to continue the investigation as a standard homicide investigation, and then if there's confirmation that it appears to be evidence supporting the fact that it appears to be Mr. Krill, then hand it across to the task force, or alternatively include an investigator or two from the task force until that point's reached. And once it's determined that it is thought to be Mr. Krill, then he could be handed across to the task force, and we could hand across a couple of detectives who were involved in the process of the investigation.
Because the detectives on the Spectrum Task Force, while well-credentialed, plenty of experienced men there, they weren't murder cops generally.
Oh, there some were, yes. Some had experience in homicide investigations and been in the homicide squad. But it's like everything else. You go to the scene and you start formulating in your mind what may have happened and what evidence and avenues you're exploring. It starts very early, and to hand that across 48 hours later or so, you tend to lose a little bit of momentum, I think, and you lose, and with the task force, if you hand it across too quickly to the task force on the assumption only that it's Mr. Krill, you tend to distract the task force, because then they focus on that and forget about their other investigations because it's more current, more headlines and more pressing.
What's that old line from detective training school? The mind's like a parachute, only works when it's open.
That's correct.
And I think in murder cases that's particularly true.
True, it is.
And it's very unusual that even if you've got a serial murder spree going on, that you would fix on a suspect or a profile before you had the evidence to propel that along the investigative path.
Absolutely. On any serial crime, whether it be sex offences, whether it be homicides, the like, you cannot take the risk of assuming that the next murder is related to this one because of some similarities. A lot of murders have some similarities, but it's dangerous to do that, in my experience anyway.
Because you are liable to a sort of tunnel vision type situation.
Yeah, you can. If you're, particularly having been on task forces myself, you can become tunnel vision if you let it get away from you. If you're not on the ball, keep that mind open all the time, it can cause you to miss the obvious.
Because that was the criticism from others about how the Karmein Chan murder investigation fitted into the overall Mr. Cruel investigation, which was propelled by a profile that was created by the FBI and assembled from a range of cases into a composite of an offender who then became the prime suspect, even though he didn't exist in reality, for Karmein Chan's murder.
Yeah, well, I think history shows that crime profiling is not what it's supposed to be, and you'd exercise a lot of caution with a profile done by the FBI. A lot of their material was discredited. A lot of the material in the UK was discredited. And my experience at this end, I have had some experience with profiling at this end, and I wouldn't rely on it.
And that I think was where it finished up. In particular, I guess if it was retained within homicide, you would have gone back to the Chan family residence where she was abducted from and looked at that scene again, looked at all the evidence and tried to separate it away from the spree of other abductions that had taken place.
Absolutely, yes. That'd be the normal part of things. And I think the idea of getting all potential witnesses and interviewing them as soon as possible before they're influenced by media coverage or any other external influences helps to get a more accurate version of what really occurred or may have occurred.
And I'm not sure whether you did this, but over the time in homicide, had you dealt with other murders within the Chinese community?
Yes, and Asian, Chinese, Vietnamese, yes. But at the end of the day, they are all based, start with the body and crime scenes, and you work your way through that, and you are looking for potential witnesses that might be able to give you some idea as to why this occurred in the first place. So it doesn't matter what nationality you are.
Because some people in the Chinese community at the time who were quite close to police said, as you said before, revenge might have been a driver.
May well have. Yes, that's why you can't afford to assume that because this happened at the house and it was similar to what happened at another premises in previous crime, so it's got to be same offender. Well, it may not be. There can be similarities, but they may not be the same offender.
Some of the detectives who worked on a crew that looked at organised crime theories to do with the abduction never felt that those inquiries went far enough, that there was the momentum towards a connection to the earlier sexual abductions was so persuasive and powerful that other possible motives for the abduction and therefore the murder were kind of overlooked a bit.
That's always a danger. It's always a danger when you're investigating a series of crimes over a long period of time. You tend to lose focus on the previous crimes and go with the most recent one because staff also get tired and lose focus and so on.
So as the investigation wore on, the Spectrum Taskforce wore on for another 18 months, 2 years, without any result whatsoever, despite a massive amount of work, you were looking on at this stage. Did you feel a sense of frustration that they hadn't followed what would be an orthodox path of investigation?
Well, I don't think the task force had a lot to do with the decision. I think it was probably the administration that made that decision and may have made a decision that had an impact at the end of the day. I'm not sure.
Did you ever go back and say, boss, can I take it back to homicide and give it to my guys?
I didn't do that, but I made it clear that I thought that it should have been left to the homicide squad. till the dust settles. In other words, you get the best picture you can of all the available evidence, and then you decide, in conjunction with the investigators of the previous crimes, what the similarities are and what are not similar, what's not similar with the differences.
And what was the response to that when you?
There was no interest in my comments at that time. The decision had been made, and that was it.
Frustrating when you already had a long track record of investigating homicides, and this was ignored.
No, I could see how that some people make decisions without thinking them through and so on, and I could understand how it occurred. Didn't agree with it, but would understand how it occurred.
Because the Chief Commissioner at the time, Kel Blair, was under a lot of pressure to get results, and I've got no criticism of him, but I think the public pressure on the Mr. Cruel investigation to find the culprit and to boil it down to one individual was pretty strong.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether that would influence public pressure would influence the investigation. So they'd be dealing in, some of the investigators on the Mr. Cruel Task Force were experienced investigators, so they could resist all that and focus on the task at hand. It might worry administrators or something like that, but it wouldn't worry the investigators.
So no result in the end, though?
No result in the end, no.
To this day, the graffiti sprayed on the Chan's car on the night of Karmein's abduction, Asian drug dealer payback, has been regarded as a red herring. If so, it clearly didn't work, because the immediate assumption was the motive was sexual assault, not revenge. And as I've explained, the possible organised crime angle was never fully explored. If Mr. Cruel did exist as a serial rapist, one can only speculate at his reaction to being tied to a murder that seemed to confirm him as a cruel and callous killer. In the absence of any new evidence, the Spectrum investigation ground to a halt after 2 years, despite an enormous and exhaustive effort by Victoria Police. In January 1993, the Sunday Age newspaper called for a change of tack. It's now more than 7 years since the child abductor and murderer dubbed Mr. Cruel first struck in this city. Since that time, he's been linked with some 10 attacks on women and children, including assaults and rapes, culminating in the 1991 abduction and murder of 13-year-old Templestowe schoolgirl Karmein Chan. After 2 years without success, the community may well ask if it's being well served by the investigation as it is presently structured. Police have a small number of suspects, but so far, no conclusive proof. The awful suspicion and fear is that unless there is a change, the next big clue to Mr. Cruel will be his next abhorrent act. But there were no more abhorrent acts that seemed to fit the Mr. Cruel pattern. Police began to speculate that Mr. Cruel had died or moved interstate or overseas. The police were left with 7 possible suspects, known in the media as the Sierra 7, past offenders who could not be eliminated. There was insufficient evidence to charge any one of them. As the investigation ground on, the task force struggled to find a new direction while chasing down false lead after false lead.
You know, we had the usual run-of-the-mill sort of disgruntled girlfriends, pointing the finger towards their ex-boyfriends and ex-husbands, etc., which took us away from, paying attention to the important stuff was out there, but it also needed to be clear.
The Spectrum Task Force was officially disbanded in January 1994, leaving its business unfinished. In December 2010, police formed Task Force Apollo to investigate a new suspect after information was received. But this man was also eliminated. I've established that this task force was not given information on the DNA samples from Anthea's and Sharon Wills's cases. The fate of those samples today is unknown. If we accept the Hampton cases were not linked to Mr. Cruel, then it's fair to say more than one offender got off scot-free. Anthea's 1985 ordeal in Hampton was the first of this so-called crime spree. She's also the first of the survivors to speak to the media. She was always doubtful that her attacker was the same individual who committed the later offences. She wonders what happened to the investigation into her case.
So it seems like, that connection fell apart, so did they ever think about maybe trying to solve the other cases that now aren't connected? Or did they just go, oh well, put those ones in the bin?
I contacted Victoria Police, but they declined to comment on the status of those cases. Anthea has had no contact with police since 1991, after Karmein Chan was abducted. She's never had any formal counselling. She's come to terms with this experience more or less on her own.
There was quite a long time when I was pretty post-traumatic stress kind of disordery. Like I can remember once I was just lying in the backyard reading a book and my mother came home unexpectedly and she came out the back door, and even though I could see that it was her, I just started screaming and I couldn't stop myself. And I really remember that feeling. I just couldn't help it. It was really bizarre. It's only happened once. But it's just the way that she came out through the door. It reminded me of the way that he came out through the door just when I wasn't expecting anyone. My mother said something like, she was talking about, whether you believe in God or not, and whether you believe that you're punished for bad things that you do. And she said something like, if I believed in God, I would think maybe because I didn't have you baptised, maybe that's why something bad happened to you. And I was like, are you insane? Where's this coming from? Well, that's the only time that I can think of that we've mentioned it. It is weird. Is it kind of weird that we haven't discussed it? I'm not trying to minimise it and say it was nothing, because there were a lot of years where I was pretty traumatised, and I can remember that even when I first moved out of home, I used to sleep with a knife under my pillow. Eventually I kind of got over it. Well, moved past that and didn't feel like I was under threat every moment. I mean, I was in my early 20s, when I still had the knife. But sorry, I always sort of mentioned it to my early boyfriends. And I guess I was saying, try and be a bit gentle with me because this happens and I might be a bit fragile. But then there came a point when I didn't feel the need to do that anymore. And then it sort of turned around and I didn't want to say it, because I hate if you tell someone something like that happened to you, then they get all awkward and they don't know what to say and they feel really embarrassed and they feel really bad for you, and it's like, well, I'm okay with it. So I just don't want to have those conversations.
It was only several years into her marriage that Anthea told her husband.
I hadn't told my husband, and it got past the point where I just didn't know how to bring it up. It was so stupid. So eventually there was something on the news about the Karmein Chan thing, and I said to him, oh look, I've got to tell you about this thing that happened to me. And then and then we had to have that thing that I just described where he was all kind of shocked whenever there's any mention on the news of rapes or sexual assaults. He sort of I can sort of see out of the corner of my eye that he's just looking at me a little bit. Just oh God. I guess that's what I didn't want to happen. I did write a diary when I was a teenager, but oh God, it's so excruciating. My mother gave me a box of my old diaries and I read a little bit of them, and I just kind of wanted to shrivel up, and I put them in the compost bin.
After so many years, Anthea was uncertain how she would react if her abductor were finally caught. He's become a distant memory, a faceless man in a balaclava. Just the smell of a certain soap remains. A voice, the warning that his liberty was more important than her life. And part of Anthea wants to leave it like that.
It wouldn't change anything for me if I could put a name to it. It's not going to change anything that happened. It's not going to change the way that it affected me. It just might bring it back for me in possibly unpleasant ways, but I don't think it would give me any real closure that I don't already have. I'm not super keen on the idea of being a witness in a sexual assault case. Can't think why. Seems like such a great experience. So I guess you could still be young enough to be still offending In which case, yes, definitely, I would be keen to see him brought to justice. But my genuine feeling is that he's probably dead.
You know, it's one of those cases that just hasn't got off the ground. It's that simple. And, you know, the thing about it is there's still more investigations to do. It's not too late. There's still aspects of that inquiry that should be looked at.
I keep in contact with a number of people from the task force. Some of them want to just put it past them, but it's also, again, partly because of egos, partly because of just the nature of policemen and ex-policemen, is that you hate to see an investigation hanging. You hate to see something not resolved. Probably 35 or 40 odd detectives out there would be thinking about this case still to this day. What else can we do? What did we not do that we should have done now? And they'd be foolish to think that they did everything, because it's, you know, there's always something else to be done.
Now, working in the task force, we saw what those victims went through, the pain and the suffering and the trauma and everything else. And like anyone else in the task force, we really did genuinely and honestly wanted this matter solved, and we wanted those people responsible out of the way. And I still feel that way, because, you know, we had contact with the victims. We saw the victims. We basically felt their pain. And, you know, anyone with kids would appreciate what we're saying here. And I say we, it's just not me, it's the whole task force. And it's a dreadful thing for a family to endure, to have their kids offended against in such a heinous way, because it's not only the offending at the time, they carry lifelong scars. And I would suggest that most of these victims, if not all of them, they never fully recover from these sort of crimes. So I think it's important that we keep personalities and any other irrelevancies out of it, and just focus on trying to get to the bottom of these serious, rotten offenders.
If you have any information on the cases we've discussed in this series or the offenders involved, please contact Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000 or visit your local police station. If you don't trust the police, you can always email me on adamshandwriter@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.